There's a strange feeling that appears sometimes when we look at the person we love. It's not always love itself. It's not pure affection. Sometimes it's a quiet unease, a small ache, or a sense that something familiar is playing out again, as if we've seen this movie before, long before we even met them. Freud believed that our relationships are not simply stories between two people in the present, but echoes from the past, reenactments of something that began in the earliest chapters of our lives. According to him, we don't fall in love as adults by accident. We repeat, we replay, and we return to the emotional climate of our childhoods, searching unconsciously for what was once unresolved. This might sound unsettling, but it's also deeply human. Freud called this repetition compulsion, the tendency to recreate what once hurt us, hoping that this time it will end differently. You may have noticed how you're drawn to the same type of person again and again, even when you promise yourself you won't repeat old mistakes. You may find yourself becoming small in love, accommodating, afraid to upset your partner, not because of who they are, but because something in you remembers what it was like to depend on love that could be withdrawn at any moment. Freud believed that our first experiences of love with our parents or caregivers leave a permanent blueprint for how we relate. If you were seen and accepted, you might grow up believing that love is a safe space to be yourself. But if affection was conditional, if approval had to be earned, you might learn to become pleasing, compliant, always scanning for cues that you're good enough to be loved. Then, one day, you meet someone who feels magnetic, but what's truly magnetic isn't them. It's the familiarity. Your unconscious recognizes something. You don't think, "This reminds me of my mother or my father," but your body knows. Your nervous system knows. You fall not into love, but into memory. It's here that Freud's ideas become both terrifying and liberating. He invites us to ask, what if your current relationship isn't only about now? What if it's a stage where your unconscious is trying, once more, to heal the original wound, to finally receive the love, safety, or validation that you once longed for but didn't get? That's why you may fight for the affection of someone emotionally distant. That's why you might feel an irrational panic when your partner withdraws. You're not overreacting to the present moment. You're reacting to a past that never truly ended. And this is the essence of Freud's insight. We live out our pasts in the present. The lovers we choose, the conflicts we create, the ways we cling or push away, they're all expressions of ancient feelings seeking resolution. Freud called this transference. When emotions originally directed at one person, usually a parent, are unconsciously redirected towards someone else. You might feel abandoned by your partner, but deep down, you're reliving the fear of being abandoned as a child. You might feel suffocated by love, but really, you're defending yourself from the engulfing control you once felt from a parent who couldn't let you grow. If we could pause and look at our relationships through this Freudian lens, we might stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" or "Why do I always end up here?" and instead begin to ask, "What is my past trying to resolve through this?" It's not about blaming your parents or pathologizing your love life. It's about recognizing that love isn't only romantic, it's psychological archaeology. Each argument, each attraction, each heartbreak is an excavation site where buried emotions surface, begging to be acknowledged. Freud's genius wasn't that he solved love. It's that he revealed its depth, the layers of desire, fear, and longing that shape our most intimate bonds. To love is to risk reawakening everything that once hurt us. But in doing so, we also open the possibility of healing. Because unlike the child who once depended on others for survival, the adult has the power to see, understand, and choose differently. Before we go deeper, I want to pause and invite you to take a small moment. If you're finding yourself reflected in these words, if some part of you recognizes your own patterns here, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like you were reliving the same relationship over and over? You can write, I'm starting to see my past in my present. Sometimes sharing that simple realization helps others feel less alone. There's something haunting about realizing that much of what we call love is in truth a dance between two unconscious minds. Freud saw relationships not as random encounters, but as collisions of unresolved histories. Two people meet, they fall in love, and beneath the surface, two childhoods start talking to each other in secret. The words exchanged between lovers, I need you, why don't you understand me, I can't live without you, are often echoes of the same cries that were once whispered toward a parent who didn't fully hear them. Freud believed that we defend ourselves in love the same way we defended ourselves as children, through what he called defense mechanisms. When we were small, they were necessary. They protected us from unbearable feelings, but in adulthood, they can quietly distort the way we connect. For example, repression is the mind's way of pushing away feelings that are too painful. So we might repress anger toward a partner to keep peace, only to find that the anger resurfaces as coldness or withdrawal. Denial might make us overlook red flags because admitting the truth would hurt too much. Projection makes us see in our partner what we can't bear to acknowledge in ourselves, accusing them of being selfish when, deep down, we're afraid of our own unmet needs. Perhaps the most seductive of these defenses is idealization. At the beginning of love, we see not the person, but the dream, the fantasy of being completed, rescued, finally understood. We project our longing onto the other, turning them into a symbol of what we've been missing all along. This stage feels intoxicating, almost divine. Freud would say it's the return of infantile ideal love, the memory of the child's first perception of the parent as omnipotent, the source of all comfort and satisfaction. But as reality creeps in, the idealized image collapses, the lover becomes human, imperfect, unable to meet our unconscious demands. And that's when disillusionment sets in. We start to say they've changed, when in truth it's our illusion that has dissolved. What follows is often conflict, not because love has failed, but because the unconscious has awakened. The anger, disappointment, or jealousy that arise are not random flaws in the relationship. They are messages from the past. When your partner forgets something important and you feel a disproportionate wave of pain, it may not be about that single act. It may be about all the times you were made to feel unimportant. When you cling to someone who seems distant, it might be because once, as a child, you learned that closeness could disappear without warning. These emotions don't come to punish you. They come to be seen. And yet, so often, we run. We break up, we shut down, or we search for someone new, hoping the next person will finally make it right. But Freud would gently remind us that until the unconscious is made conscious, the pattern will repeat. Different faces, same story. We don't escape the past by avoiding it. We escape it by recognizing it, by learning to see when our partner has become the mirror of a memory. That's not easy work. It requires slowing down, sitting with discomfort, asking yourself, who am I really angry at right now? Who am I trying to win over? Why does this silence feel so unbearable? These questions open the door to awareness, and awareness is what Freud saw as the beginning of freedom. Because once we see the ghost behind the pattern, we're no longer controlled by it. Imagine this, you're in the middle of a fight with your partner. Your heart is racing, your chest tightens, you feel like you're losing control. In that moment, the adult part of you might vanish, replaced by a frightened child. Freud would say, this is regression, the mind's return to an earlier emotional state. You're not weak for feeling this way. You're revisiting a wound that was never healed. The fight is not just about what was said today. It's about every time you felt unseen, unheard, unimportant. If you can learn to recognize that shift, if you can pause long enough to see that you've slipped into the past, something miraculous happens. Compassion enters. You realize that both you and your partner are fighting invisible battles, both replaying the unfinished business of childhood. One might be chasing affection, the other might be fleeing control. Neither is the enemy. Both are trying in their own way to protect themselves from the same fear, the fear of being unloved. And that's where real love begins, not in the fantasy of perfection, but in the courage to see the truth. Freud never promised happiness. He promised understanding, and understanding, he believed, is what allows us to live more freely. To see that our anger is a plea for connection, that our jealousy hides a longing to feel special, that our silence often masks fear. When we see through the disguise, we stop blaming and we start listening to ourselves and to each other. If you're still with me, I want to invite you to share something from your own story. Have you ever noticed yourself repeating the same pattern in different relationships? The same kind of conflict, the same emotional ending? I'd love to read your reflections. You can comment, "I'm beginning to see my patterns." Sometimes, acknowledging them aloud is the first step toward breaking them. Freud often said that we are not masters in our own houses. By that, he meant that much of our behavior, especially in love, is governed by unconscious forces, impulses, fears, and desires that live beneath the surface of awareness. Yet, he also believed that through self-reflection, we could reclaim that mastery. We might never be fully free of the unconscious, but we can learn to listen to it, to understand its language, and to make peace with the parts of ourselves we once exiled. And nowhere is this more vital than in our relationships, where every act of love or withdrawal, every argument or silence, tells a story written long ago. There's a quiet transformation that happens when you begin to see your relationships through this Freudian lens. You stop seeing your partner as the cause of your pain, and you start seeing them as a participant in your healing. You realize that love is not about finding someone who never hurts you, but about finding someone who is willing to face the hurt with you, to stay when the ghosts of the past appear. It's about learning to hold space for both the frightened child and the conscious adult that live within you. Freud's insights remind us that we are all carrying the traces of our first loves, the parental figures who taught us what affection felt like, what distance meant, what it cost to be loved. And so every adult love becomes a negotiation between memory and reality. The challenge is not to escape those early imprints, but to integrate them. To realize that your partner is not your parent, and that you are no longer the helpless child who once had no choice but to adapt. Imagine for a moment that you could see your partner not as an adversary, but as a mirror, reflecting the places within you that still ache. When you feel rejected, that pain may be pointing you toward a part of yourself that still believes you are unworthy of love. When you feel controlled, perhaps it's revealing your fear of losing autonomy, born from a time when your independence was punished. These moments, though painful, are opportunities, invitations to bring compassion to what once felt unbearable. Freud would likely say that healing begins the moment you stop running from what love reveals. Because love, at its deepest level, is not comfortable. It exposes us, it awakens the unconscious, it calls us to confront our dependency, our vulnerability, our longing for validation, and yet this confrontation, if met with awareness, can become the very source of growth. In that sense, Freud saw love not merely as pleasure, but as a form of psychological work, a process through which we become more whole. The beauty of this view is that it frees us from perfection. Relationships no longer need to be flawless to be meaningful. The moments of misunderstanding, the recurring arguments, the quiet insecurities, they are not signs of failure, but signs that something deeper is unfolding. When you stop demanding that your partner fix your old wounds and instead take responsibility for seeing them, the dynamic begins to shift. You start to speak differently. You no longer accuse with anger, but share with vulnerability. Instead of saying, "You never listen," you might say, "When I feel unheard, it reminds me of when I used to feel invisible." That's when understanding replaces defensiveness. In Freud's world, awareness is liberation. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you notice the old story starting to replay, you loosen the grip of the past. You begin to make choices that come from consciousness, not compulsion. You stop choosing partners to heal your wounds, and instead you heal your wounds so you can truly choose your partner. And in doing so, you rewrite your emotional history, not by erasing it, but by giving it a new ending. It's important to say that this work isn't easy. Sometimes awareness makes you feel worse before it makes you feel free, because to see clearly is to feel deeply. You might realize that much of what you've called love was actually fear of abandonment. You might notice how often you silence your needs to avoid conflict. But remember, these realizations are not punishments. They are awakenings. They show that the unconscious is beginning to speak, and that you are finally ready to listen. There's something profoundly human about this journey. We all carry within us the desire to love and be loved, and the fear that we might lose it. Freud didn't see that fear as a weakness. He saw it as a sign of life. To fear loss is to value connection. The key, he said, is not to let that fear control you. To love fully, we must accept that love is fragile, that it awakens what we've buried, that it asks us to grow. And perhaps that's the most powerful way to see your relationship differently. Not as a place where you find completion, but as a space where you discover who you are when the unconscious becomes conscious. If you've come this far, it means something in these words has resonated with you. Maybe you've started to see how your past still whispers through your present. Maybe you've realized that your patterns, though painful, make perfect sense once you understand their origins. That's the beginning of change. Not a dramatic transformation overnight, but a quiet shift in awareness that slowly reshapes everything. So, as you return to your relationship, or even to your solitude, try to carry this thought with you. Love is not here to make you comfortable. It's here to make you conscious. Each moment of tension is a mirror, each conflict a doorway, each tenderness a glimpse of healing. Freud would remind us that we cannot love without encountering ourselves, and that's the point. Love, in the end, is not only about the other person. It's the most intimate conversation you will ever have with your own unconscious. And if this reflection has stirred something in you, a thought, a memory, a quiet realization, I'd love to hear it. Share in the comments what part of your story you see differently now. You can write, "I'm learning to love with awareness," because when you share, you don't just speak for yourself. You speak for everyone who's trying to make sense of their own hidden patterns. And before you go, I want to thank you for being here, for allowing yourself to listen, to feel, to think a little deeper. This space is not about perfection, but about truth, about learning to meet ourselves with the same tenderness we keep trying to find in others. If you felt something today, consider subscribing, not out of pressure, but out of connection. Because together we're building a place where psychology becomes human again, where love, loss, and self-understanding can finally meet. So take a breath. Look at the person you love, or the person you once loved, and know that every story, every emotion, every mistake carries meaning. As Freud might say, the unconscious doesn't speak in words, it speaks in repetition. But once you begin to listen, once you begin to see, you'll realize that your relationships were never broken. They were simply trying to show you where you still need to heal.